Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a project update video for this 2003 era Armortek early production German Tiger 1. Since the last video update, the model now rides on its suspension and the sprockets and motors have been installed and mounted to the tank. We'll be going over these additions and details in this video. Starting with the tank sprockets. The sprockets that the 2003 and 2004 batch of the Armortek Tiger 1 kits would have looked like this unit here. The sprocket is a single piece aluminum casting. It is all one piece, like I said, with the teeth ring, support arms, and bell housing all integrally casted and molded. The ring of fasteners that you see here are purely for detail purposes and serve no functionality. The sprocket installs to the spindles in the same manner as do all Armortek tanks, and that is with the use of a taper brush lock. The original Armortek kit featured a white metal casted hubcap with the detailing on it. The detailing that would have been found on this tank here would have been that of a mid or late production Tiger 1 with the star pattern of fasteners. These sprockets here are very durable and run well. The sprocket that you see here is one of my own spare parts, which was purchased along with my original Armortek Tiger 1 and was kept in case of a rainy day situation in which the sprocket wore down or I needed a replacement sprocket. Luckily, none of which was ever needed, and that's why I still have the sprocket in mint condition. Regrettably, the original kit supplied sprockets that this kit would originally have come with were missing in the parts boxes and totes that I have for this model. So new sprockets needed to have been tracked down and procured. Luckily, I was able to get new replacement sprockets from Armortek direct. I want to give a special shout out to Jill from Armortek for, again, the fantastic customer service in hooking up and arranging for me to get these replacement parts. This is one of the hallmarks of Armortek and is one of the reasons why I prefer their kits. The sprockets that you see here, if you notice, are a lot different compared to the original single piece unit. These sprockets that you see here are much more improved. I believe these sprockets here are from a later release Armortek Tiger 1 kit, probably from about 2006 or 2007 time frame. I say that because this version here, if we notice, has some excellently done casted texture surface on the bell housings. The bell housings are still casted aluminum and are still one piece. The only difference is that rather than having the teeth ring molded in, these pieces are separate and are CNC'd aluminum. Other than the separate teeth ring, the hubs will install to the Armortek kit in the exact same manner with that of the taper brush lock that I showed earlier. As for mounting on the teeth rings, this is done with fasteners, just like the real Tiger 1 and just like all subsequent releases of the Armortek kits. The sprockets, once fully assembled, will be in spec with the older sprocket. As you can see, if I line up the tooth rings, the timing matches up perfectly, as well as the width of the sprockets are also in spec. So these newer sprockets here should work and time perfectly with the original track that I have here. Even though these sprockets here are the current design of Armortek sprockets with that of separate tooth rings, this version here of the sprockets are no longer available and are supplied with the current generation of Armortek kits. Rather than their place, Armortek has redesigned the design of the sprocket, and on their more recent Tiger 1 releases feature a sprocket design like this version here. This version here is from the 2015 release. The modern version of the sprocket features almost the exact same pattern and design of the mid-2000 variation. The tooth rings install in the exact same manner, and with that of the fasteners. They also mount to the tank via a taper brush lock, and are the exact same specs in width and height. The big difference between the two units is that on the mid-2000 release, they are made out of cast aluminum, while on the more recent variations, they are comprised out of a single piece of billet CNC'd aluminum. Both sprocket designs are excellently done. They are both very strong and will offer years of use to the end user. The reason why Armortek moved away from the castings to billet was both for cost. The casted units do cost more to produce than that of CNC billet, and billet for Armortek is a lot more economical in that they do have the proper CNC machines which can make more billet components in a quicker time frame for a less cost compared to their casted counterparts. As a quick note, we can see that to replicate the cast look, I went ahead and added the cast texturing to the billet component so that once painted, the two pieces will look indistinguishable from each other. And then to compare all three of them, all three generations, we have here the original pattern, the mid variation with the casted, and the billet version of the sprockets. And here are the sprockets being assembled. Currently on the sprockets, I went ahead and had the inner tooth ring mounted to the hub. All of the fasteners are simply just mounted in their place, and a drop of Loctite was fitted to each of the threads in order to, of course, keep everything firmly in place. Currently, I am working on the outer tooth ring and getting that portion installed as well. One mod that I made to the tooth rings prior to the filming of this scene is that on the Armortek tooth ring, as well as on the bell housing itself, the tolerances are very, very, very tight, which is seen on a few of the other components on the tank. The pieces are a little bit too tight in some locations, and the ring will have a little bit of a snug fit in fitting onto the bell housing. One mod that I did was I went ahead and opened up slightly the tolerances on the teeth ring in order for them to fit onto the hub a lot more easily than compared to its original kit offering. The way this was done was that on my drill press, I went ahead and mounted on one of these very large jumbo sanding drums, and I carefully went ahead, while the piece was spinning, I carefully and evenly removed just a small little bit of material around the inner circumference of the tooth ring. With that small amount of material removed, the piece fits onto the bell housing with a lot more ease. This is also, like a few of the other mods that I mentioned in my previous videos, this is a mod that's really intended for someone that has a lot of experience and a steady hand, as the piece can easily be overground, which will utterly destroy your tooth ring, and that would be a huge problem. Also, the bell housing itself is perfect as is, and no amount of material needs to be removed from this component here. With the material removed, it is now time for me to add on the fasteners. However, prior to adding on the fasteners, I need to fabricate the little security plates for the fasteners. The Tiger 1, as well as most other German tanks, on their sprocket have these little plates which, once mounted with the fasteners, are bent upward, and they prevent the fasteners from backing out while the tank is in operation. It's kind of a mechanical version of Loctite. It's a trademark detail found on all later war German tanks, Tiger 1 and King Tiger included. The Armortek kit originally, back when the first generation model was released, did not feature these details. However, when Armortek redesigned their kits with the multi-component sprocket, the small little retention plates were included, and they were actually made out of photo etched brass. The components were very nicely done and are featured on the current 2015 version of the early Tiger, which is found on my video listings as well. When I acquired the sprockets, the small little PE plates were not included, so they needed to have been scratch built prior to the assembly of the sprocket. In order to scratch build the pieces, I went ahead and scanned the tooth ring, and in Photoshop I went ahead and made a small little paper template. The paper template is the exact same size and is in spec with the Armortek tooth ring. Once the template was created, I went ahead and traced it onto lengths of sheet steel. As you can see, all of the pieces have been drawn on, and this piece here is now ready to go to the next step, which will include the drilling out the holes, cutting the little plates, and sanding them to proper size. Here we have the finished plates right here. It is from this point here where they will be added to the sprocket. And will mount on as such. The small little plates here are a nice little bit of detailing, which greatly helps the look of the sprocket and makes it stand out compared to just mounting the rings on with no detail whatsoever. Once these details are added and the sprocket is going to be one solid piece, it will then go into prime and paint, to which then will be mounted to the tank. And here goes the tank, just prior to having the hull rotated and the tank being placed on its suspension. As you can see, before I go ahead and rotate it, I went ahead and added the dry brush weathering to all of the rubber tires. The dry brush weathering was added to both sides of the tank. The reason why the weathering was added was because once the model is rotated, getting access to all these tires will be very difficult. So I took the advantage of the tank being upside down to add this weathering. With the tank now sitting on its suspension, it's now time to install the motors. For the motors, the tank is utilizing the original motors which were originally supplied with this generation of Armortek Tiger 1. At the time, Armortek utilized an all-in-one motor and gearbox from a British motor company called Paravolux. These Paravolux motors were supplied on all the Armortek kits, from their Tiger to their M4A3 Sherman to even their Panther. The motors are very powerful and do perform quite well. Also, another unique feature about these Paravolux motors that I found was that the motors have a nice little growl noise to them, and on some tanks when the tank is moving, it actually sounds like the tank has an engine sound, when actually it's just the motors just churning on their gearbox. Opening up the box. These boxes, by the way, are still originally sealed by Armortek from when the tank was first shipped. So it's a bit of a unboxing. Motors come wrapped in bubble wrap, and when you open them up, this is the motor unit that's inside. As you can see, these motors are very similar to the type of motors that Armortek use today. However, the current generation uses a different vendor instead of Paravolux. As for who the current vendor is, that information I don't have. As you can see, it's an all-in-one gearbox with a gear already pre-installed by Armortek. It's a nice little feature, and the gear is installed with that of a roll pin. These gears are perfect, and they never wear out or even get loose when the tank is in operation. They're very well engineered. They come pre-wired with the connection snaps already pre-installed, and the motor is ready to be installed out of the box. There's another motor in the second box, and the tank utilizes two motors, one for each side, just like the current Armortek generations. As for mounting the motors to the tank, that's facilitated with these pieces of hardware right here. These two CNC'd aluminum L brackets bolt to the bottom portion here of the motor like this, and then this portion here bolts to the lower hull of the tank. These two flange units are what connect the motor to the side hull, which connects into the final drive assembly. This system here is almost identical to what's used today. However, the new current versions are a little bit more developed from the variants that you see here. One of the ways the new contemporary units are different is that these units here are not threaded. They are just simple holes that are through the aluminum, and to mount on the motor you need to put the fastener on one side and a nut on the other end and tighten it. With the newer generation versions, these here are pre-threaded, and you simply just thread the fastener directly into the component with a little bit of Loctite, which I've featured in several of my other videos. This unit here is a little bit more time consuming in that you do have fasteners to contend with in order to get the pieces mounted on. Prior to the installation of these components, they will all be primed and then installed. And here are the motors now with their mounts added, ready for installation onto the tank. This motor here, you can see the way the flanges hook up. The motor mount itself is what's threaded, and there are 4 fasteners that simply just get bolted to the gearbox mount. Of course, needless to say, Loctite is going to be used on these fasteners. And here you can see the bottom mount also fitted. As you can see, the way it's shaped, the mount is designed so that the motor sits in this type of a format with the tank's lower hull. This motor here is going to be added right after the filming of this scene, and as you can see, a bit of grease has been added to the final drive gear. The same exact procedure will follow and will be added to this motor just as soon as it's ready for installation. As you can see, it's the same setup, only it's a mirror image as it's for the opposite side of the tank. What's also interesting to point out is that these original Armortek Tigers and tanks did have this L bracket which bolts to the bottom of the hull. This is one portion of the tank's design which was deleted in future and subsequent releases of Armortek tanks and are only found with the Paravolux equipped motored versions of the Armortek kits. And here go the motors now fully installed and mounted to the tank. As you can see, it is all mounted and is currently all one unit. With the double mount setup, the motors are firmly mounted in place and there is absolutely no wiggle or any type of looseness to the component once fully affixed. All of the kit supply parts were utilized and all of the holes lined up perfectly. It was a very smooth install with absolutely no need to alter or modify any of the parts. The only quick addition that I did make was on the 3 fasteners that mount the flange to the side of the hull. I went ahead and added a small little lock washer to all 3, or actually 6, of these fasteners. Lock washers were also added to the 2 fasteners which are mounted on the bottom of the hull, which bolt the bracket to the tank's lower hull. The lock washers are an easy addition to add, and in my opinion give a little bit more strength and rigidity compared to just using the fasteners alone. Also, no need to mention, but red Loctite is also heavily and strongly recommended for use for this application. And here's the exterior of the final drive with the motors now mounted. Now it's important to note that in order to mount the motors, the sprockets need to be off of the model. Due to the 3 fasteners that you see here, if the sprockets are in place, getting access to these 3 fasteners are going to be absolutely hard, if not impossible. Also, if you can see, I went ahead and just used a standard Allen cap screw and did not try to add any countersinks and blend them into the tank's bodywork. Because of the design of the motor mounts on this tank, adding the countersinks and deleting them and flaring everything in is a bad idea in case any maintenance needs to be made to the motors, in which the motors may need to be removed. If that's the case, bad news will conspire if you have these components here blended over. Also, with their location, once the sprocket gets added, these 3 fasteners here are completely unseen once the track and sprocket are fitted. And here are the sprockets ready for installation. As you can see, since the last scene, all of the fasteners have been added and their retention plates can be seen. The sprockets also have a thorough coat of primer, base coat of Dunkelgelb, as well as the interior portion of the sprockets have been airbrushed with their weathering. Again, the reason for weathering them at this point here is just like with the rest of the suspension, that once it's installed, will be difficult to get to. As for the installation of these, like I mentioned before, they are done with the standard Armortek method with that of the taper brush locks. And here go the sprockets now installed to the tank. They are fitted on with the taper brush locks, which I mentioned earlier. And as for the sprocket installation, the taper brush lock does a very good job in keeping the sprocket firmly in place where it needs to be. Once the sprockets are installed to the tank, I always like to go ahead and test the sprocket with the motor in order to see if the sprockets are installed straight, to make sure they're nice and true. If the sprockets are installed and are uneven and have a little bit of dithering to them, that is unacceptable and can cause derailment with the track further down the road, which is less than ideal. In order to test everything out, I will be hooking up the motor leads to the battery terminals. As for the battery, I have here a 12-volt lithium-ion battery. We'll be going over more information about this as in an upcoming video when I go into more detail about the tank's electronics. Until then, I have everything all jewelry together. I touch the lead. Here we have the sprocket turning. As you can see, it is installed nice and true. There's no dithering, and the pieces are running nice and smoothly. A similar test will be conducted to the opposite side. And here we have the same story. What's actually very impressive is the fact that these motors have been untouched since they were packed by Armortek about 10 years ago. And as you can see from this video, they are performing absolutely flawlessly and have been kept in really good condition by the customer. With the sprockets and the motors now out of the way, the tank will now have its track assembled and fitted to the vehicle. In addition to the track, the electronics are going to start being fitted as well as calibrated to the model and getting the model up and running. And with that concludes this project update video for this 2004 era Armortek early production German Tiger 1. If you like this video, stop by and like us on Facebook, and don't forget to check out eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thank you.